Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation. My name is Daniel Porras and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Legatix. In this episode of Cracking Legal Innovation, we're joined by Chris Grant, Managing Director of Client Value at Goodwin. Chris has spent the past 2 decades at the intersection of legal innovation, client value, and big picture transformation. In the early part of his career, Chris spent 4.5 years at Freshfields and spent nearly 10 years in-house at Barclays and HSBC, where he spearheaded major legal transformation programs, launching legal tech incubators, driving alternative fee models, and helping shift the way legal services are delivered and priced. He's been recognized on the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers list, the Legal 500 GC Power list, and is a familiar name in the legal operations and legal tech communities. Anthony, Legatix CEO, and my co-host and I first met Chris in 2018 as part of Chris's role in establishing the Barclays Law Tech Eagle Lab, a collaboration between in-house teams, law firms, and tech companies, of which Legatix was one of the initial companies to be involved. If you've ever wondered how clients really define value, what they expect from firms when it comes to innovation, and what it's like to drive innovation from the client side versus from within a law firm, today's conversation is for you. Welcome, Chris.
How are you? Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am great. Fantastic to have you on board. So I know you're only a few months into your role at Goodwin as Managing Director of Client Value. So can you maybe we start by diving into what that role involves exactly?
Yeah, I like to do roles where the titles don't often give away what I'm actually doing behind the scenes. So they're always interesting ones. But ultimately, I mean, head of client value, I'm here to look at what we deliver as a firm, making sure that is aligned to what clients really truly see as being value. And so it's not just about that legal expertise and delivering that legal excellence, which most firms do, right? That's the bread and butter part of it, but really focusing also on the commerciality, predictability of the work that we're doing, and really focusing on that true partnership. Everything from thinking about how we scope the work to reduce the surprises, to thinking more creatively about how we price, and therefore thinking more about how we communicate progress and successes at the other side of it. So really putting the client at the center of everything. I mean, it's the way things should be working, but certainly Goodwin is a firm that is making sure they're going to be doing that going forward. So it's not just about the billing, it's really putting the client at the heart of every interaction.
Well, you're certainly someone who's got the skill set to be taking on that role, given your in-house roles. And I'd love to ask a question that I'm sure is on many people's minds, which is, in your prior roles at HSBC and Barclays, you're regularly involved in setting law firm panel requirements, having the relationship catch-up meetings and holding firms to account. How does it feel to now be on the other side of the table?
It's kind of the pain giver is probably where I was. I think one of our firms, when I was sat on that side of it, likened the relationship meetings to a dental appointment. I'm now getting the tooth extraction. Look, it's really interesting. I've got to say it's a mixture of surprises, good and eye-opening. I think all good positive surprises, certainly with Goodwin, in that a lot of what I thought was going on behind the scenes was going on behind the scenes. So I had kind of read the relationship in the right way, but it really is a bit more around that kind of empathy, right? I've really got a newfound empathy for law firms. I'm not completely blind to how a law firm operates and the way things work. It's more of those, I had suspicions as to what was making things more challenging and what wasn't, where we were able to make easier wins and what was stopping us from doing some of the things that we couldn't do that we wanted to. And I'm seeing why, right? I'm getting the mechanics of it behind the scenes. It reaffirms those assumptions that I'd been making. But I've got to say, I mean, making that leap from client side to going into a law firm wasn't one that I took lightly. And I don't think there were many firms that I would have been happy to make that leap for. I needed to see a firm that was going to drive the change that I'd been talking about for, I mean, you said it at the beginning, 2 decades. That hurts, right? It's like, gosh, what have I done in those 2 decades? Yeah, I'm very used to pushing that innovation side of things, but I've got a real understanding as to what the blockers are that stops us from doing that. And like I was saying, I was only going to jump for a firm where I thought that was going to be something we could change. And I've got to say at Goodwin, it's already changing. I'm having conversations that I didn't think I would be having. I've got partners coming to me with ideas about how to price in different ways. It's not as if I'm dragging these things from the firm. They're very proactively seeking ways of doing things in a different way, which yes, makes my job a lot easier, but also a lot more exciting, because I've been trying to pull ideas from firms about how we can do things in different ways. And now I'm this side, we're able to push those ideas out.
I've definitely sat next to an innovation leader who I won't name, who was getting ready for their dental appointment. I was sitting there nervously, asking how they can kind of best showcase innovation and things like that. I do think you've been at the center of actually being a little bit more demanding as a client. And I'm always surprised that clients aren't more demanding, because if we think of, like, we're always trying to drive change in law firms. And I always think the client could be so much noisier. It's almost like they don't realize how much power they've got. Like there's one thing that makes lawyers jump and jump however high they want. It's a client request. Do you think clients could be more demanding? Were you the first one to be a bit more demanding and design the dentist room?
Yeah, the dentist. Look, that was just one. A lot of them loved them. I assume. And that law firm did come back after we'd said, go away and try some of the things that we've talked to you about doing with other clients and see what you get. And they got nothing but positive responses. So they came back to that room and said, we get what you're trying to do. So it probably still was a bit of a dental chair. Yeah, thinking about that, I've been in this industry a long time, and I remember the days of when law firms used to sack clients, right? I remember being in those conversations where we're not working with you anymore, right? Which was a strange place to be. But in many respects, it's also something I wanted to get more of from our firms. So to put that into context, right, that we need to have an honest conversation with our firms. And that conversation is, yes, about getting new work, but it's also about us going, there's no more new work, right? We're spending less. We need to focus on the firms that we're spending with. What you've got is probably all you're going to get from us. If that's not working, then we need to have a different conversation. So there has been this change. I do think the client needs to step a little bit more into that. You are the client. You can ask for certain things, right? There is that position, not necessarily a power. I don't want to be in that situation where, sometimes it can be abused. I think we could use that power in other ways. I don't think everybody maximizes on it. And I think people will go into that going, well, my spend's not big enough to ask that question, or my spend's not big enough to be able to push that change or drive that change. I don't think that's true. I think you need to be able to feel that you can still have that interaction, build that relationship so that you can have that interaction. And importantly, there's another bit in there in going, well, if that really is your problem, group together with a few others, right? I've driven a lot of change on the banking side by bringing banks together to make a bigger demand of the law firms that they're working with. And that's not then the conversation about how high do I need to jump. It's like, well, we can fly if you want, right? What do you want from us now? If there's 5 of you all demanding this, let's see what we can do to make this happen. So I think it's being clear as a client as to what you need, being able to articulate that cleanly, and yeah, leverage a bit of that position. Just don't abuse it. That's more from me now being on the law firm side. Go back and watch anything I've ever said before. That might be slightly different.
Going back to that client side, and maybe some of these views have changed, Chris, but I know you've often said that clients care more about outputs than inputs. Can you unpack that a little bit about what that practically means for a firm in your view when sort of thinking about value?
Yeah, look, it's and I still stand by it. I do still stand by it. I think we don't really care how you do the work, right? As long as the work is done. It doesn't matter if you were 2 hours, 20 hours, 90 hours, but did that work actually get us to the right result and get us about what we wanted? It's not about how many associates were in the room, necessarily about how things were, you resourced it. It's those bits of, was the deal done faster? Was it done smarter? Was it done cheaper? Were you able to think more effectively about how to make that done? Let's talk more about what we need to get delivered. And it is that outputs. It's not about necessarily the work that's going into it. And that's where I think we get a lot of challenge. It's that we spend so much time talking about hours, and that's building up the proposition at the outset. And then we talk about them again at the end when clients I should think about whether I do a client hat or a law firm hat just to make these conversations easier at some point. I don't know, or change accents. Maybe that's what I need to do. Switch between accents. That can be funny. But It's that bit of, at the end, we're still talking about the hours that we were talking about in the beginning, but stripping more out. Or there'll be something that's gone on in between and things need to change and we're back to talking about hours again. What is the output? What is the outcomes that we want to achieve? And let's look at it from that perspective. How do we actually get that to a position where we're comfortable from both sides that that's something we want to see? So it's still the same story. I still agree with it now as I did then. Let's talk about and be very clear about what the outcomes are from a risk perspective, from a speed perspective, as to, an M&A transaction. What does it look like on the other side? Who do we need to see that's still around that business when we come out the other side of an M&A? All of these things matter. Those are the things that make, if you think about, certainly from an in-house banking team, what makes that team look good in front of their clients, right? So that's the business, that's the bank's clients, that's the CFO, that's the board, that's the shareholders. How do we make sure that that is primary goal for that legal in-house team? Therefore, primary goal for the law firm is to help to enable that and make that happen. So understanding what all of those requirements are and being able to deliver to those is far more important than it is wrangling over the number of hours it needs to take to get that matter done.
So keeping your client hat on for a minute, you also often talked about effective fee arrangements as opposed to alternative fee arrangements. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that to be basically where we're truly not talking about the billable hour as part of the alternative fee arrangement versus the tendency often that, yes, you've got your alternative fee arrangement, but you keep pulling back to a discussion on the billable hour. Has anything changed? And do you, what's your view on effective fee arrangements at the moment?
I do love this question. And I can speak somewhat educated on this from my time at HSBC, where we had significantly moved the dial. So we'd set a kind of target in place to have 80% of all new matters be on an effective fee arrangement. From our systems perspective, because all you needed to do was tick a box, we were seeing that was being delivered against. We therefore needed to, of course, do deep dives into it to find out whether that was really what was happening. And of course, in the early days, that was not happening. We got more comfortable with it. And I think the moment where it really flipped for me was when we did deep dives with our law firms into those metrics. So not just looking at our numbers, but saying to our firms that you've got 2 months. We're going to do a relationship meeting. We're going to deep dive into effective fee arrangements. I want you to do the analysis on your matters. And I want you to come back and tell us how well they're working from your perspective. And it was great because the honesty in those conversations was fantastic, right? So firms coming in going, we're not quite at the 80%. But we started this and we were probably at around 40%. Coming into this meeting, I can categorically tell you we're now at 60% because I've gone back and made sure that those matters have changed. The other ones will be fixed by the time we get to the next relationship meeting. So we will have hit our 80% target. But here's some other things that we'd like to talk to you about, because this is what makes it hard for us to put these effective fee arrangements in place. And we need you to come and help us to do that, because it will be, and no surprise to anybody, challenges around getting scope right. And some of those firms came into those meetings and showed me some of the scoping documents that were going out. And we were using a tool to manage most of our tendering. So we've got lovely physical copies and reports that we can run on the stuff that's going through. And one of them gave a lovely kind of preamble as to the problem and then put a one-line statement at the end that went, and this might become contentious. I was like, okay, and what did you do with this? I'm like, well, we pushed for it and never really got any further forward. So it was that recognition that there's two sides to it. And because we were having those conversations, I was far more comfortable that we were starting to turn the tide on more effective fee arrangements being put in place. Will we ever get to 100% effective fee arrangements? I mean, certainly if I look to the GC where I was before, come hell or high water, they will get to a pretty close to 100% EFA number. But there's still nuances, right? Not every matter lends itself easily to an effective fee arrangement. Neither does it make sense to necessarily go through the pain and trauma of putting some of those in place. There's also regions where that is just not the standard, right? There's particularly over in Asia, we saw a lot of challenge to moving even away from capped fees, just because that's just the way that the industry worked. That's going to take a little bit longer to chop and change. I mean, what we do start to do, and a real success is, I think, as we moved through our last ever panel refresh, certainly whilst I was there, it may well change in the future, we did a review of rates, and that was there more as a fallback, so that if we couldn't get anything else in place, what was our fallback position from being able to control cost? But we had firms that came forward and said, take out the rates. We don't need a rate card. We're very comfortable working with you on effective fee arrangements. So let's not put a rate card in place. Or it was hold us to the rates that you've had for the last 3 years because we don't use them. Right. And if that's what you want as your fallback, we're fine as that as a fallback. Now, I think some of those firms in there were masking rate increases and thought they'd be able to play the game, but they're now on a kind of 12-month trial where every single one of those engagements is going to be under a greater level of scrutiny. The thing that we will always have in our back pocket, certainly at that organization, was we commercially tender every piece of work. So you're up against more than just yourself putting that work forward and that pricing arrangement in place. So there will always be a benchmark that really allows us to test those prices coming through. So the EFA is definitely winning. It's coming forward.
So, Chris, I'm interested under the effective fee arrangements, again, kind of keeping your client hat on. How have you seen firms effectively communicate value to you if it doesn't ultimately come back to a discussion about the billable hour?
The honest answer to that is not very well. And I think as a client, we've got a hand to play in that as well, because we've got to help to bring that conversation forward. Ultimately, what does help is when we start to have the conversations around technology or improving the process for getting things done, because that bit around value coming forward is how have you been able to do this in a way that we would not normally have been able to do it? How have we been able to think about driving those efficiencies that we've been asking for a long time? It's maybe easier if I talk about what the good was, right, as opposed to going not very well, like what was really beneficial. It was those bits where firms come forward to do post-matter debrief and really talk about how they were able to do things in a different way. And often this gets hidden, right? We don't have that conversation, and there will have been great things that were done. But if you don't create a space for that conversation to be had, you don't know about it. And that's where there can be articulation around the use of technology that was put through. Maybe they partnered up with an alternate legal service provider to help deliver some of the work in a more cost-effective or cost-efficient way, or they used resources out in Belfast or wherever it was. Like the machine's been turning and we just see the output. Actually having more of that dialogue helps. The real value bit came through when some of the questions were more about how could we have done it better, right? There's often, firms are always very comfortable talking about how well they've done. Do we ever really ask the question about how could we have improved that? Did that deliver against your expectations? Did the outcomes hit what you wanted to do? We think that doing X, Y, and Z helped us achieve what you needed to in a better way, in a smarter way, and tick that outcome box. But how could we have done more of it? It's back to that sell the outcome, not the hours. How can we improve upon that outcome next time we have this kind of situation? That helps to bring the value conversation to the table. And it's always that bit of aligning, because value will be different to different people. Even from a law firm perspective, value will mean different things to different clients. So the secret sauce is having that conversation to find out what that value means. They might be very happy with just, well, we got additional CLE training. Brilliant. CPD points training was delivered. We got that free secondee. Marvelous. Others may be looking for a little bit more, but unless you have that conversation, who knows? You're talking about this, it's all smoke and mirrors.
That could be quite a difficult conversation for a firm to have. Like, what could we do better? I think lawyers like everything to be perfect as well. Do you think that reflects better on the firm when they're willing to say, okay, well, this bit, we'd like to open up and say, like, how could this bit go better?
It totally reflects better. I mean, we're all getting trained on new ways of, even mid-years and year-end as individuals, right? We're being asked to do more on a feedback position, right? Feedback's a gift. We're getting trained on how to receive feedback, right? This is all happening within firms. It's happening within the clients. Why should it not also be happening with that law firm and client relationship? If you truly are an extension of our legal function, then treat individuals as they should. The other secret sauce is find somebody else to have the conversation. If you're not happy having the conversation, find the right person to have the conversation. When in my previous roles, I was that person, right? If the lawyers were having a challenging situation and we still needed to get the deal going forward and things were really getting problematic, I could step in. I could go in and go, don't worry, right? You carry on, get the work done. I'll go and have that difficult. I don't mind having that difficult conversation. It's less difficult for me. I'm stepped away from it and I can go and have a conversation with somebody on the law firm side that also is a step away from it and we can get it fixed. And it's not like, you're not going telling teacher, right? This is a different scenario. This is us just helping to work through a relationship in the right way to get the right result. So I think there's two bits of, yes, feel comfortable to have that conversation. You're very happy to do it internally. It should be done externally. Feedback is a gift, but work on how to receive it and think about how to make sure that that lands in the right way. If you're really struggling, there's somebody else that can go and do it, and have people in your organization that can help to facilitate that. That's why we had heads of external engagement within the clients. That's why I'm now in a law firm doing a value role. It's why we've also got business development people in there, right? There are other ways of having that conversation, but first step, try and have it.
So, Chris, often value can be synonymous with the cost.
Yes.
Of the deal. And it feels like sometimes, and it must be so difficult when you're moving towards this effective fee arrangement approach, because if you're tendering for a piece of work and you're focused on the outcomes, you're going to receive a bunch of potential, pitches with significantly different numbers on them. And they might claim they'll get you different outcomes. Maybe one might claim to be able to get you the deal done faster, to mitigate your risk more, to, I don't know, whatever the outcomes are. How much does cost ultimately come down as the primary driver, or how do you evaluate different pitches when, the value is positioned in different ways?
Really good question. And there's a lot to unpack in that, but I'll try not to make this a war and peace. There's lots of bits in that tendering process. And I think we are learning a lot as we're starting to use more and more tools to be able to help us evaluate in the right way. I can speak from experience that race to the bottom is not what we're always trying to achieve through tendering that work. And in fact, as I saw metrics coming out, and with the tool that we were using, we could see what our lawyers were selecting, which law firms were winning, how many times it was the bottom number that was winning. And that was on the lower side, right? That was not the overarching. So I'm definitely comfortable that we were able to kind of manage that in the most effective way. And we'd taken away reverse auctions. So that other bit of what can be often a race to the bottom and feels like a race to the bottom, and I'm now on the other side of that, which is quite interesting. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. We definitely didn't move forward with it in my previous role, just because we wanted to have a more transparent conversation. And actually, if there is disparity within those numbers coming through, that gave us more of an opportunity to really help. And back to my point about we never really got scoping, and getting those initial instructions out is never great. Actually, what we would see if there were big disparities, there was suddenly something else that one of the firms would come through as putting into their numbers that we could either go back and go, we didn't need that, so refresh and see what that looks like, or we'd not thought of that. And maybe that then leads to two scenarios where we go, well, that firm's just shown something that nobody else did in the mix. That's now something we want to consider. And there's either we go, well done you've shown us something and you've set yourself apart from everybody else. You're the ones that we're going to go with. But maybe let's just talk about that price a little, but we get why it's higher. Or it's, that's something we should probably share. That changes things. It's a significant change in price. We still want to make sure we're paying the right price. So let's tell the other two firms within that mix, we need you to also consider this that hadn't been considered before. And likewise, it's that bit, like I said at the beginning, it can be something that we'd not thought about or something we just didn't want to be included. So it helps us with that kind of scoping exercise. So disparity in cost actually helped us. So being able to have that help drive the different conversation, which helps to bring the value conversation back into the mix again, helps to articulate the pricing in the right way. Two-way conversation, such valuable information.
Yeah. So that's what you're doing at the, as part of the pitching process. When the deal's done, were there certain metrics or indicators that you would look to assess whether the firms were genuinely delivering value to you as the client?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things. So one, there's always that look back, and we're not very good at this, right? This has never been done. Even did we pay what we said we were going to pay from the AFA, EFA perspective? Did we use the technology that they mentioned in the initial pitch that they were putting forward, right? That pitch just vanishes into the distance, which that used to all be done over email. Now it's done through tools, so you can easily go back and look at that. The other thing that we had implemented was net promoter scores. So at the closing of a matter, it's would you recommend this law firm to a colleague for their work, right? And that hides a multitude of things. I mean, what we had started doing is aligning it to our expectations. So there would be a score against pricing, there'd be a score against the kind of predictability and management of the matter, there'd be a score around use of technology. Lawyers don't love the feedback tools, right? They want it to be quick and smart. And they also don't love approving invoices half the time as well, certainly on an in-house side, because again, focus on fighting over the numbers that need to be in there. Another reason to have EFAs. If you get the numbers right, just pay. So there was a big focus on then starting to use that to then facilitate the future relationship conversations, because we could then start to articulate to our firms how they're performing. Here's your net promoter score. Here's where you're benching against other firms. Here's the verbatim feedback from our lawyers, because we would always ask that, what drives that score. So it starts to give a bit more information. In the amazing world that I like to paint in my head, this all becomes a lot more automated, right? This is to pay the invoice. It's already been matched. We know that it's what we agreed at the outset. All you need to do as a lawyer is just say, is the matter complete and what's your score? And off it goes, right? That's it. Matter's paid, and we link all the systems together, and it works absolutely beautifully. But that is the bit. If you don't ask the questions, you don't truly assess how things were done, and you don't have some kind of feedback. I mean, I like a net promoter score. I learned that from my Eagle Lab days, right? Everything that we did within that Eagle Lab had a net promoter score. You filled in forms for us. Every time we did a training session or you had a mentor, it was always about the net promoter score, and we became obsessed on where we ranked around all of that. It was a very powerful tool. It's the only thing that I'd ever, in terms of that feedback bit, really paid attention to. I loved it. So I just thought that really worked quite nicely for our law firms. But it takes time to embed, because gathering feedback and giving it in a more constructive way is not something that we necessarily do as an industry. We will talk if things have, we sometimes will talk about if things have gone wrong, but we'll have that conversation in terms of, I'm not paying for that. Actually, let's be more constructive in that conversation. But having KPIs and having real performance indicators, very important. But for those to work, you also need to articulate what your expectations are so that people know what they're being measured against.
It's really interesting what you say about actually measuring what firms said they were going to do. I think from the technology side, we've seen a decent amount, I think, of what we might call innovation theatre. So firms will be really keen to go out with like press releases of like, we're using Legatic, we're using X, we're using Y. And we will often like support firms quite heavily on things like panel pitches where they want to talk about how they're going to use Legatic to deliver their matters. A complaint we often hear from clients is that sounded nice on the pitch, but it wasn't necessarily delivered. And I think maybe a part of the answer to that was that firms were trying new technology. It was new to the firms to buy, prove, roll out a piece of technology. Well, you might only do that on like 10 matters to start with before you roll it out to 1,000. And it is exciting and it's at the forefront and it's innovative. But there seemed to be a bit of kind of, from what I sensed in the clients I spoke to, a growing kind of frustration that there was a bit of a gap. Legal technology in the meantime's got bigger, it's got sort of a little bit more mainstream. Do you think that as an industry, we've still got that gap and that's a problem, or do you think it's improving now?
Really, this is a really good question. And this is another one that I have a lot of conversations with peers in the industry about, because there definitely was an innovation theatre. And I think there's an RFP problem anyway when law firms respond to RFPs. And this is very much from my client's perspective. They throw everything in the kitchen sink at it in the hope that something sticks. That's not the conversation that I necessarily want to have. I want to have the conversation. And there is some secret sauce in this, which I'm going to keep for Goodwin. But there is a bit of what's in it for me, what's actually going to be delivered and driven by doing these things. But there's also a flip side to it where clients ask this question, but then at the end of the day, they can't take up that opportunity to use that technology. It was one of the biggest problems that I saw within the bank. I mean, heavily regulated industry, terrified around AI, terrified around our data, and rightly so, because we've got regulators breathing down our necks. So as much as we would go out and ask that question and we'd get a lovely list of things that we could then possibly use, when it came to using it, couldn't do it. Right, we just could not cross this hurdle. And that was something I was working on, and I still didn't have the answer to it by the time I left, but because it's a massive thing to change. But how do we make technology more accessible for the client? How do we make it so that we can really truly leverage and use some of the amazing technology that is out there? So it's that bit of, yes, there was throw the kitchen sink at it, hope something sticks, but then also we're asking questions that we already setting up for a fail, because regardless of the answer, we can't use it. And that's where I think there's a bit of a frustration still to be had. Now, I think firms definitely have moved forward in terms of their use of technology and have been able to make that work and driven changes. And some of the stuff that they're talking about, they are now very much using. And that goes back to that question of, did you deploy it on our matter? How are you going to deploy it on our matter? And making sure that that then happens and then that is delivered. But we've got something more challenging that still needs to be overcome as to how do we just make this work. Now, it will happen, because there's no way that 10 years down the line, we're still battling with this conversation about how do we use technology. right? That's the one thing we know, right? From your journey as to from when you started and we were in that lab together and all of those bits where we were just hurdle after hurdle, and you've made massive progression, right? You're de facto tool for many law firms now. It will change. How can we just make it happen faster?
I think there's a different conversation now as well, because I think some of the firms originally felt they needed to have technology to be able to put into the pitches. And frankly, they didn't care whether or not they then actually used it on the deals, because they won the work, they got the panel appointment, like that's what it was. And that was the true innovation theatre. We're hearing more and more so now, kind of pleading with us to go and be approved by a number of the big financial institutions or by the clients. And I know we've had those conversations, Chris, in your prior roles about what we can do to support whatever's needed internally to actually allow the firms to use it. But there seems like, much more of a law firm driven, a law firm driver to actually make sure that the tech is deployed and used with the clients.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've certainly felt that shift. The barriers are still there. I mean, it's so difficult. It kind of feels like, I've tried multiple times to think about, can we do something on a kind of industry level? Could we get all the CIOs of the major banks in a room and actually just discuss this and figure out what are the challenges and can we move it forward? But we've been discussing this for 8 years and it's progressed a little, but not
painful.
It's a lot of work. You can't skip the infosec process at a bank.
No.
They're just never willing to do that, but you can do it. And you're competing against all the other priorities for infosec at the bank. Corporates, I think, are a little bit better. I think, less heavily regulated, that can be a better space. But I just think we just need to do the work. And I think there needs to be the push and enough push in the banks and in the big financial institutions to say, okay, well, this is something we want to prioritize and devote infosec team time to. And we're seeing that happen more. We're seeing the legal teams in the bank get more say. But I think we just have to do the work. And it's I'm consuming, it's expensive.
I totally agree, right? I totally agree. We have to do the work. And there's a bit of, I go back to previous experiences, right? When we do this en masse, we get somewhere, right? We did that with the BLT portal. I know I keep on talking about that every once in a while. I like to drag that one back out again, but I love that because that was, 20 years ago, where a group of banks came together and said to a group of firms, we have a problem that we need to solve. And we all collectively got behind a piece of technology and we made it happen. And it became the standard, right? Really quickly, because we were able to do it. And there's that bit of, yes, we've got to do the work and we've got these cyber controls that we need to get through and the data privacy stuff that we need to get through. But is HSBC's requirements that different from Citi's or Deutsche's or Barclays? Could we just say, well, if you're good with Deutsche, we're going to be good? Right? Can we build this standard? Like we've got ISO certificates for left, right, and center that says there is a standard. Is there a regulated standard that once you've got that stamp of approval? And look, I think it's very basic, right? And I know that there's a whole lot more that sits behind it. But if we've not got some kind of North Star to strive towards, at least, could we eliminate some of those questions, some of those things? Because we're all asking the same questions. We like to word them slightly differently just to make life a little bit more interesting, right? But there's got to be something that allows for a level of standardization that means you've hit one, actually to go to another, there's maybe 5 additional things that you need to do just to make them comfortable with what their specific requirements. Put the work in, but let's not put the work in 20 times. Let's put the work in once with a little flavor and flair 20 times, right? There has to be an easier solution.
So, Chris, I'd love to dive into a little bit, and we've started talking about technology a little bit as well. I suppose this is actually wearing both hats.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, there's obviously a growing cost that firms are investing into innovation, both the people like yourself coming into firms, but also the legal technology that they are buying and they're investing in. Maybe starting from a client perspective, but would love to get your view from a law firm perspective as well. Like, how do you think about that cost from a client perspective? Is that something that you should share in the cost of the legal tech and the innovation with the firms that you're working with? Would, for some of the tech or some of the people supporting it, should that be put on as a disbursement on the bill? Like, how do you think about the cost and the investment that the firms are making it from a client side, maybe to start with?
Yeah. So look, I think the conversation that I used to have And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this one. And I think there's nuances depending on client, depending on who you're working with. But fundamentally, there's a bit of what you do that is the cost of you just doing business, right? I'm not paying for your Outlook. I'm not paying for the knowledge management team necessarily. That is standard. That is just the way you're working. If there's something that is going to be a clear benefit to me to use that in a different way, where we've got options, right? There's two ways that we can do this thing. I can do this traditional way and I can throw 30 lawyers at it. Or we could bring in this technology and it's going to drive that. It's going to give you a different outcome, faster, quicker, whatever. That's maybe something that we do have the conversation around what that price is. There is a significant investment into technology. And if we just go from a client perspective, we're not paying for it. Where does that investment then start to come from? What are you leaving us to do but continue to charge by the hour? We have to think about the different ways of starting to put these together. So for me, it was always that bit of, well, let's have a conversation around it. If this is genuinely something that is going to be of benefit to me, it's not just a feature of your firm, it is going to drive a benefit for us, help us achieve those outcomes that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, then yes, let's put a price tag on it. Let's work. And there's a world where I can imagine seeing something and going, actually, I'd pay a premium for that. That I'm going to give you a bit more for because nobody else is doing it. It really is achieving an outcome that I didn't expect we'd be able to get in a time frame that we didn't think we'd be able to get it, in a way that it's managed our risk in a way that hadn't been perceived before. Yes, let's have that conversation. What should the price tag look like? I think ultimately just being able to have that clarity to talk about what falls within scope of something that we should pay for and what we shouldn't pay for. And I think things over time will move into that bucket of, no, that's just cost of doing. That's just what we do, right? That's just how that's the way we work. So it will become another Outlook, another PowerPoint, another Excel, right?
That's what I find fascinating, right? Because I think of, it's not like when the first firms deployed the internet and email that people were using at home, that they're like, right, we're going to start charging you now for not having to post you the latest version of your document. We can actually do that, online. And I still remember when I started practicing, we had, when we were doing couriers that would go on the bill, printing, we'd actually have, I think we were still almost individual pages that we were printing were kind of put on, and then it became a standard office charge. And then for some clients where it wasn't part of the engagement terms, we wouldn't be allowed to have a standard office charge, so it'd be written off. And I've always wondered where technology will get with that, because again, as an M&A lawyer, there was a willingness from the client to pay for a virtual data room because they were probably previously needing to pay for all of the printing and the location of the physical data room, and probably people getting taxis to go and sit in a room for 12 hours a day and do all of that. And that was all factored in. So it just became a virtual version of it. And I've always asked that question with something in the early days with something like Legatix. Is it going to be, given it's client facing, is that going to be something that will be a disbursement on the bill? Or is it something that's more operational and it's kind of just expected as part of the way of doing work? And the really fascinating thing from, this is our world, but we've seen both kind of play out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a disbursement and it is uncharged, and then otherwise it's kind of seen as a core way of delivering the work. And instead it's kind of focused on as an internal cost. And the firms think about, how's this helping us to give a better client experience? How's it helping us to improve our profit margins? How's it, doing away with, allowing lawyers to get home earlier, and thinking about it from that perspective. But I still ask myself that question as to exactly where we do end up drawing the line for what is passed on and what isn't.
And I don't think there'll ever be a situation where we get to a point where it's done, right? There will be new technology that comes in that requires significant investment. If you look at just the way even accounting works, right? You will have an asset and it tapers off, right? The value of it. I spent a lot of time on the software side of things, and we were working out at what point we sunset the software that we're building and when do we introduce the next versions of it, right? There's so much that goes into the kind of full life cycle of software and technology, therefore, that changes the way that you need to look at it and the way that you then start to price for it. There is, as with always, there's significant investment upfront when something is new. As things then grow, become more embedded, more clients start to use it, your charges start to reduce over time because you're probably working on new technology anyway. There's something else that's coming in through the door, but you're getting that quantum of clients coming through, which means you start to offer better deals. Everything starts to shift and change. So I think there will always be that front-loaded significant investment to bring something on board, but that then starts to taper off over time. So there will always be this bit of, if you want us to do this, we're having to invest, we're having to bring in, we've got to put, change and transformation in place. We've got to bring in people that surround this tool that we're using. Big investment, but you pay for that investment at some point, and that's when it then starts to become that BAU. It's like when you've got that, God, I love an analogy, but thinking about the Severn Bridge, right? That was the point where you used to have to pay, they built it, we had to pay off that bridge getting built, so they charged the tolls, and then when we paid it off, it's free, cross the bridge, right? So I think it's very similar with it. Such a random analogy, but it's the same type of thing, right? We invest in our business. We have to cover those charges somehow. Sometimes we can eat them quite comfortably. Other times this is a significant investment that we're putting in that's going to be of a greater benefit in the longer run. Maybe we need to charge a little bit more up front, but once it's embedded, we've paid for that investment, we're off and rolling. It just becomes part of the BAU. It's never going to be one size fits all at all, but I do think there will be this cycle that we'll go through as things become more effective, more efficient. We move away from billing by the hour. We can start to talk more about the costs of our business and start to charge from a profitability perspective and our base costs. We bake all these numbers in. I think fundamentally what we still need to do is nothing's hidden. There's no hidden. Nobody likes a hidden charge, right? That's why Ryanair, EasyJet, all the rest of it. What am I going to get charged for next? It's the same thing with us from a firm perspective. If we're going to change where the pricing goes, there can't be any hidden charges. We need to be very clear around what makes up our costs. And that then is, how do we then define what technology looks like? But it will change depending on the technology that we're talking about.
Are we kind of almost past that, though? If we've got a fee arrangement where you're paying a certain amount for a matter, it's totally up to the firm how they deliver it. If they want to, they can put 500 people on it and work them 3 hours a day, or they can find a piece of technology and potentially earn a greater profit.
Exactly right.
Do we kind of move past that?
Yeah, I think we would still be asking the question of, because it's the alternatives, right? I don't think any firm's going to go in and just load it up and assume that we're going to pay for all those bodies, right? And all those hours. But it is that bit of knowing your client well enough to go, I think this is the best scenario for you. We could use alternative B, but I think this is the right way to be able to drive the right outcome for you. Therefore, this is the price tag that we're putting around it. If we stop talking about how we're going to resource it from a rack rate perspective and talking about the hours and say, actually, to get you the right outcome, we will be putting a team that's got one partner on it. We've got 2 of our best associates that will be working through there. We'll also have a legal project manager that's going to be working on there. And that's a conversation for another day as well, like pricing for legal project managers. And we're also going to use this technology to be able to deliver on this outcome. This is what we think that outcome should be. This is what that's going to cost you. Where do we get to, right? That is the bit of the conversation which would and hopefully should move us away from that pricing challenge. But we will always, as long as that hourly rate sits in there, it makes it very hard. And that will always therefore be a conversation about the technology. And there's loads of different schools of thought on that. You've run a great roundtable on that recently where so many different perspectives were thrown on the table. I've had many conversations in my network around what to do. And it's everything from, well, we just charge what we would have charged for the bodies. I'm like, that's not going to work, right? That's not the right approach. But that's an approach. And maybe a client might be quite happy with that. Or it's, we just eat the cost. This is fine. We're going to deliver an efficiency and it doesn't actually cost us significantly, and we can deploy those heads on other matters. We're not going to double charge them. Let's do the right thing. So there's no, like I say, I don't think there's any surefire answer to it, but I do think it will resolve itself over time, particularly if we can get rid of that hour conversation.
I think you've very much been someone who's sitting at the center of almost redefining the approach for the industry. And I think a lot of other financial institutions have followed your lead. I think that's trained and taught law firms how to sort of pitch their value differently even. And I think they then are taking those same approaches to pitching value into other pitches, some of them by hiring you specifically, but others by just kind of like taking that knowledge. Where do you see the future of this going?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I know where I'd like it to go. Whether that's the way it kind of ends up, I don't know. But The dream is we're in a position where we've moved away completely from traditional pricing. Law firms are delivering services that are technology enhanced, that are focused on getting the right outcomes from the client. The client is better about talking what they want to get from things and feel comfortable having that conversation. Law firms are using data and information that they have through the tools that they're using to help predict the future. I mean, from a client side, what I kind of really wanted is a law firm to come to me and go, something's brewing, right? There's flags pinging on our data in terms of the work that we're doing that we think is going to drive a challenge for you in the next 6 months. And we're here for you. And here's what we're going to do to help to negate that. Now, if you start to do this now, you'll solve that problem. Or we start to build up our defenses for when this lands in 6 months' time. And we are gathering a greater data set through the use of the amazing technology that is available that should help to inform that. So almost the industry flips to this post action defensive position to predictability and protection starts to come through. I think it is this harmony, right? Where, I mean, it'll be interesting. There's a big conversation around what law firms look like in another 10, 20 years, though my period of that increases every time I have this conversation. It used to be I'd stand on a stage and go, in 5 years it'll all look different, and it's like, in 10 years, in another 5 it'll all look different. But I think we are on the precipice of that right now, where we've got to move. Law firms will run more like businesses, right? There's no other company that is set up to do what law firms do, hit the reset button every year and see where we kind of run out. We will start to run more like a business. We will have deeper relationships with our clients that allow us to deliver against their expectations and work focused on outcome and value more than what we currently do at the moment. We will just have much greater data insight that will help to really steer us in a newer direction. Like I say, give us that predictability and be able to think about how we can tackle some of these legal problems in a different way. Tech's going to throw its own new problems on the table that we've not even thought about yet, right? What we need to service from a legal perspective and the problems that will be put on a law firm's table are going to look very different in another 10, 15 years than what they do now. But we need to think about that. I'd love to see a world where there's more embedded partnership between the two. And that comes from everything from the way that you work on matters, but also how we change this industry. How do we shape this for the future? Let's have more of those early, honest conversations, create space outside of matters to talk about ideation and shared pilots and doing that different way. I mean, we have to create the space for that. And again, whilst you're billing by the hour, it's very hard to create the space for it. But I think that's the way things need to move. I threw a lot in there. My future sounds dazed and confused as opposed to clear and concise.
It's an exciting picture of the future, but I know there was a conversation you were a part of recently that I was also involved in, Chris, around the big four and consulting firms, for example, as businesses, and some of the nuances of, you know, how law firms operate and some of the challenges that come with that with regards to this. But we know the big four, typically when you get a consulting job, let's use that as the example, you go to one of the big consulting firms, they are very good at that output kind of driven approach. It's like, this is the scope, this is going to be the bill, we're going to deliver this is the timeline, and it's kind of take it or leave it. You might have a little bit of a squibble over the you know, the exact amount, but you know, that's kind of it. And you know, I know there was a lot of discussion about the degree to which law firms can actually get there and what's required from a transformational perspective. The other thing that was part of that same conversation, I recall, was a question that was posed around, if law firms are increasingly becoming technology companies, are we actually set up in the right way as law firms to deliver technology-enabled services? So yeah, I don't know if you've got any sort of thoughts or comments on, are we set up in the right way? Can we navigate that change over the next, you know, we're not going to get to that perfect outcome in, you know, maybe in the next year or the next couple of years, but do you think we can make that transition of what's needed given the, you know, the nature of where everything's going?
So, look, and I love this conversation, and I've been reflecting on it, and I still don't know I've got my answers lined up around it, because there is that bit of, will we become tech companies? Will be, and I can't remember who said it, but I wouldn't say anyway, but there was, I think, a comment around the table that we will be tech-enabled legal service providers, right? So we will still be legal service and providing advisory, but that will be a tech-enabled place. I don't know where tech's going to take us, right? There's definitely going to be a change. And I spent some time with another organization outside of the financial services. I mean, it was insurance that I'd been working at for a while. And they had to change their proposition. And that came from when we bought Azure came around, and they were, what we offered as our service was being able to send out actuaries to go and do risk and financial services, to kind of analysis, data analysis and actuarial work, running massive financial modeling platforms. And that was all based on us doing the work because we were the only ones that had the tech capability and the data capability to run that. When we had access to Azure, we suddenly were in a situation where we could start to sell our software. And we then did very much become a software sales business because people could buy into using the cloud and start to run a lot of these things themselves. So it was a shift, therefore, from being the ones that did all the work to the ones that facilitated it and then helped with the output and provide that advisory service around it. And they flipped quite successfully. They were an agile organization and one that was preempting and thinking about tech and what the new world was look like. This was a release when that kind of came through. I'd love to say that is the similar thing that would start to happen around law, where we provide access to our services in a different way. And there was lots of chat at that very meeting where it is actually the client's already a step ahead of us. As the law firms are producing their work, the first thing that the client's doing is sticking it through ChatGPT to say, and these are the questions that we have, right? And that other bit of the client has done half the work already with ChatGPT as its sounding board and then coming out to the law firm to do the last little 20% of the work. So we have to be able to respond and change to that challenge. I think the big four, and again, this was something that was said in that room which really resonated with me. I mean, it's in the title, there's four, the big four. It's very easy for the four to kind of make things work and almost align as hundreds, thousands. I mean, I just look at the number of firms that I've had on my panels before. There are literally thousands. How do we get alignment there where there is a de facto state for the industry? Because there'll be always somebody else that sees this, doing things this way as their competitive advantage, somebody else seeing this way as being their competitive advantage, and the client therefore always having choice. Big four, we still have a choice of four. We'll often take one of them out because they're our auditors, helps and narrows the field down even further to a three. They all charge, and they're not a place that we, especially, and this was always interesting when they started to build out their legal services. It was still a bit, but you're pricey. You already charge us a fortune for the other stuff that you do. Why are we going to go to you over a law firm? I'm still trying to reduce kind of costs. But it's a smaller playing field, and therefore it's a tighter market that allows there to be a standard set, and it lends itself to that. So we have an expectation, and the client has to play the client role to a little bit more. We've got a lot more leeway with law firms, which I think makes it more challenging.
Is there a future where law firms aren't, run like technology businesses, but are actually almost just run like businesses? And in fact, that's a huge transformation in itself.
Yep.
So some of the context I've had for this, we have law firms coming to us for the data on our platform because they want to start doing certain analysis on just how transactions occur. And that could be, who's on certain transactions, who has certain client relationships, how big were certain transactions, and then how did that compare to their billing data? How are they kind of resourcing these things? How does the cost sort of depend on how many parties are involved in the transaction? Like these kinds of questions would be almost like basic operational questions for any other business. So if you're, I don't know, Amazon, or you're manufacturing widgets or something, you'd know how many like items are going through the machine, what your stock levels are here, and most businesses actually just have like hugely sophisticated operational systems for optimizing all sorts of their operations, whether from a cost perspective, technology, resourcing. And I think there's a big vision for our platform here and for the data, which I'm excited about. But it is almost like a complete transformation, law firm just running a bit like a business. And yes, having to deliver your service for less cost or for a fixed cost, or having flexibility as to whether you throw people or technology at the problem massively enables this. But in a way, it's sort of like really, really basic. They're just running like every other business on the planet. And at the same time, it is almost a total transformation.
Couldn't agree more. I think it's that it's probably the only way forward. But to also enable that, what you therefore need to do is bring in people that know how to run a business. And I'm not saying lawyers don't know how to run a business, right? They've been very successfully running their businesses for a long time. But it is, to your point, others do things in different ways. They do things in better ways. They are thinking about how to improve profitability, drive efficiencies, answer the demands of the shareholders. There is a different demand upon them. Therefore, businesses, and we've been running businesses very well outside of the kind of partnership model for a very long time and made them super profitable. And we're already seeing challenge come in the form of the alternate legal service providers who are able to set themselves up in different ways, who run like businesses and therefore deliver in the right way. Law firms need to think about it, right? They absolutely need to think about it. But I think the most important thing is bringing in the right people to help to make that happen, that have that different perspective and that different experience.
Well, Chris, I think that's probably an optimistic point to wrap up today. I do think that there is an opportunity there for firms to, differentiate themselves through how they're thinking of navigating, through the change. I always really enjoy our conversations. I think what I really enjoy in particular is the sort of candid navigation of what the challenges are from that, the client perspective, but also, the law firm side as well. But I do always enjoy in particular our conversations because I'm filled with optimism about
If we come
the
out with
opportunity that's there. The opportunity that's there ultimately for both firms and for clients and the industry as a whole in terms of where we're going. And, people like yourselves who have, really been committed to thinking about client value and, doing that on the client side and navigating that with the law firms, but now from within a law firm, helping to think about, how we can drive that change. So have immensely enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you very much.
Likewise, thank you.
Joining us.
Really enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you very
much.
much.